It was supposed to be a normal flight, a quick trip home after a week of hard work. The man at the center of this story wasn't just another traveler. He was dressed neatly, calm, and polite as he handed over his first-class boarding pass. Yet within minutes, security surrounded him, passengers stared, and his dream flight turned into a nightmare. The reason? He was a black man in first class, and that alone was enough to make some people suspicious. What started as an ordinary check-in spiraled into chaos. The airline staff whispered. A woman pointed. And before he could even sit down, an airport officer grabbed his arm. Cameras came out. People began recording. The man stayed silent, confused but composed, while the officer said the words that made the entire terminal freeze. "Sir, you're under arrest for attempting to board with a fraudulent ticket." But here's where things take a turn nobody saw coming. Because this man wasn't just any passenger. He wasn't a criminal, and he definitely wasn't trying to cheat the system. In fact, the truth about who he really was would flip the entire situation upside down, and leave everyone, from the officers to the flight crew, completely speechless. What they didn't know was that the man they humiliated in front of hundreds wasn't just innocent, he was powerful enough to change their lives forever. Stay with me, because this story isn't just about racism. It's about justice, revelation, and the shocking truth that came to light minutes later. The morning had started quietly. Marcus Reed woke before sunrise in his Chicago apartment, the city skyline still wrapped in fog. It was one of those peaceful mornings that almost feel like a reward after a storm. The week had been a blur of meetings, presentations, and late nights, but today, finally, he was heading home to Atlanta. He made coffee, checked his phone, and smiled at a photo of his daughter, Alina. She had texted a heart emoji with, "Hurry home, Dad." That single message was all the motivation he needed. Marcus was the kind of man who carried calm wherever he went. 6'1", neatly trimmed beard, soft-spoken voice. His friends joked that he could diffuse an argument just by walking into a room. He wasn't flashy, though he easily could have been. As a senior technology consultant for one of the largest defense firms in the country, he earned more than most people his age. Still, he preferred quiet confidence over show. He dressed in a navy suit that morning, not because he had to impress anyone, but because he believed appearance set the tone for respect. "Dress the way you want to be treated," his father used to say. At O'Hare Airport, Marcus arrived early, as always. The terminal buzzed with weekend travelers, business executives, and families juggling luggage. He made his way to the priority check-in line, ticket in hand, first class, Delta Flight 1890, to Atlanta. The woman at the counter looked up and smiled politely at the passenger before him, a white man in golf clothes. She laughed at his joke, printed his boarding pass, and wished him a wonderful day. When Marcus stepped forward, her tone shifted just slightly. Still polite, but distant. "Good morning," Marcus said, handing over his passport and ticket. She scanned it, then frowned for a fraction of a second before masking it with a smile. "You're in seat 1A? "Yes, that's correct." All right." She tapped her keyboard, nodded, and handed back his pass. "Enjoy your flight." It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed the pause. But Marcus did. He'd seen it before, the micro-expressions, the small flickers of doubt that said, "Are you sure you belong there?" He didn't let it bother him. He thanked her and headed for security. At the TSA line, the agent checked his ID, scanned the boarding pass, and gave him an approving nod. "Lucky you, first class." Marcus smiled back. "Just trying to get home comfortably." Everything seemed fine. He made it through security without issue, grabbed a coffee from the cafe near Gate B12, and sat down to check emails. Yet something about the air felt strange, like static before lightning. He couldn't name it, but the tension hung there, invisible and waiting. Across the terminal, 2 gate agents whispered while glancing at him. He assumed it was nothing. Maybe work chatter. Maybe a scheduling issue. But one of them, a tall man with a badge reading S. Dawson, kept looking over. When boarding time arrived, Marcus stood, adjusted his jacket, and approached the gate. The first-class line was short, just him and an older couple behind him. The agent scanned his pass, hesitated, and frowned. She murmured. Mr. Reed, can you wait a moment? Marcus's stomach tightened slightly. Is there a problem? I just need to verify something with the system. He stepped aside, watching her whisper to another employee. They both looked at his ticket, then at him. Then came the words that pricked at his composure. Sir, did you purchase this ticket yourself? Marcus blinked. Yes. Is there an issue? She forced a tight smile. We're just confirming. Please have a seat for a moment. Other passengers stared, curious. The older couple behind him looked uncomfortable. One whispered, That's strange, they never do that for us. Marcus sat down calmly, phone in hand, heart rate steady. He wasn't new to this kind of thing. He'd been questioned before for simply existing in spaces people didn't expect him to be in. A luxury store, an upscale hotel, a private event. Every time, the same quiet assumption followed him. There must be some mistake. 10 minutes passed. The gate filled with passengers. Marcus watched the agents whisper again, the man named Dawson now on the phone. He caught bits of their conversation. Yeah, code check, boarding discrepancy, yes, African American male, mid-30s. That phrase, African American male, rang in his head like an alarm. He took a breath, stood up, and walked back to the counter. Excuse me, he said, polite but firm. I've been waiting. Can someone explain what's happening with my ticket? The agent stiffened. Sir, we're just doing a verification. Please have a seat. With all due respect, I've already checked in, cleared security, and have a valid boarding pass. I'd like to know what the issue is. Before she could answer, a uniformed airport security officer approached. Mr. Reed? Marcus turned. Yes? I need to ask you a few questions about your ticket, sir. The room fell quiet. Even the chatter of boarding announcements seemed to fade. Passengers looked up from their phones. Someone started recording. Marcus's instinct told him to stay calm. He handed over his ID and boarding pass. Of course. What's the problem? The officer studied both, then looked at the gate agent. This is the one? She nodded quickly. Yes, that's him. Sir, the officer said, we have a report that this ticket may have been purchased using fraudulent information. Marcus blinked. Excuse me? The officer's tone hardened slightly. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. And just like that, the quiet morning shattered. Passengers gasped. A child asked, Why are they arresting him, Mom? Someone whispered, What did he do? Marcus raised his hands slightly, not in surrender, but in peace. Officer, I think there's been a mistake. I bought this ticket directly from the airline's website. You can check the payment record. The officer didn't respond. He simply gestured toward the hallway. We can talk about it privately. Please follow me. Marcus's eyes met the agent's. She looked away. As he walked down the terminal, escorted by 2 officers, a heavy silence followed him. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the humiliation, Marcus felt something else stirring: resolve. He didn't know yet that this incident would explode far beyond this airport. That it would spark headlines, investigations, and a truth so shocking it would leave everyone speechless. But for now, he just walked, calm, dignified, and determined not to let fears show. Because Marcus Reed knew something the officers didn't. They had just made a terrible mistake, and before long, the world would know exactly who he was. The small gray room smelled faintly of coffee and stale air. A single fluorescent light flickered above, throwing uneven shadows across the table. Marcus sat quietly, hands folded, the ticking of the wall clock filling the silence. 2 airport police officers stood by the door, speaking in low voices. Every few seconds one of them glanced at him, as if expecting him to suddenly confess to something. He wasn't angry. Not yet. But his patience was starting to thin. He'd been sitting there for nearly 40 minutes, no explanation, no questions, just waiting. Finally, the door opened. A woman in a navy blazer stepped in. Her badge read Detective A. Ramirez. She carried a file and a tablet, and her expression was the careful neutrality of someone who'd done this 100 times before. "Mr. Reed," she began, sitting across from him. "Thank you for your patience." Marcus nodded. "Can someone please tell me why I'm here?" Ramirez opened the file. "We received a report from Delta Airlines that your first-class ticket might have been purchased with a stolen credit card. We're verifying the transaction before allowing you to board." Marcus leaned back slightly. "That's impossible. I bought it myself. My company's corporate card, legitimate and verified. You can call the finance department if you like." She studied him for a moment, as if weighing whether to believe him. "Do you have proof of purchase?" "I have the email confirmation right here." He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and showed the receipt. Delta Airlines, payment by corporate account ending in 9072, confirmed 3 days ago. She glanced at it, then at him. "All right. I'll forward this to the airline." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Detective, I understand you're doing your job. But I've been sitting here for almost an hour, while my flight is boarding. And I'd really like to know, why me? Why was I singled out?" Ramirez hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the officers by the door, then back to Marcus. "I can't speak for the airline staff. They flagged your ticket," we responded. "Right," Marcus said quietly. "They saw a black man in first class and assumed fraud." The words hung heavy in the room. She didn't respond. After a long silence, she stood. "Let me make a few calls. Please wait here." When the door closed, Marcus's composure cracked for the first time. He ran a hand over his face, trying to stay calm. Years of experience in corporate America had taught him how to keep his cool when confronted with bias. But this was different. This was public humiliation. He thought of his daughter again. What if she saw this online? What would I even tell her? Outside the room, muffled voices rose. He could hear snippets. "We can't confirm. Card matches, someone must have misread the alert." 10 more minutes passed before Ramirez returned, this time looking uneasy. "Mr. Reed, we've confirmed your payment. It's valid." Marcus gave a tired smile. "Good. So I can go?" She hesitated. "There's more. Apparently, the airline manager wants to speak with you before you're released." Marcus frowned. "Why?" She didn't say. Moments later, a tall woman in a red Delta uniform walked in. Her smile was tight, her tone corporate. "Mr. Reed, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. This was a misunderstanding." Marcus kept his voice even. "A misunderstanding that involved police and accusations of fraud?" "Yes," she said quickly. "But it was a system flag. Nothing personal." "Nothing personal," Marcus repeated, almost to himself. "Do you treat all first-class passengers this way when there's a system flag?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. "We sincerely apologize. You'll be rebooked on the next flight." Marcus stood, straightened his jacket, and looked her in the eye. "That won't be necessary. Sir? I'll arrange my own travel. But this conversation isn't over." He picked up his briefcase and walked out. Outside the interrogation room, the hallway buzzed with whispers. Passengers had filmed everything. The footage of Marcus being escorted out in handcuffs had already begun circulating online. By the time he reached the exit, his phone buzzed with notifications. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, clips titled, "Black man arrested for flying first class." Comments flooded in. "This is disgusting. Racial profiling again. Imagine paying thousands for a ticket just to be treated like a criminal." Within hours, the video hit 500,000 views. Marcus checked his phone and sighed. He hadn't said a word publicly yet. But the world was already reacting. He called his assistant, Jordan. "Hey, I'm going to need you to schedule a call with legal and communications first thing in the morning." "Everything okay, boss?" "Not yet," Marcus said quietly. "But it will be." That night, he stayed in a hotel near the airport. He didn't sleep much. Between the calls from reporters and the messages of support flooding his inbox, the situation was spiraling. By morning, CNN and major outlets were running headlines. Black executive detained at O'Hare for suspicious ticket purchase. The company's PR team called immediately. "Marcus, do you want us to release a statement?" "Not yet," he replied. "Let them keep guessing who I am for now." Because that was the twist, the one no one at the airport had realized. Marcus Reed wasn't just a senior consultant. He was the vice president of strategic operations for the very defense firm contracted to modernize airport security systems nationwide, including Delta's. And the irony? His company's software was designed to prevent false alerts and racial bias in verification systems. Now, that same airline had profiled him publicly, on camera. He knew he didn't need to shout. He didn't need anger. He just needed proof, precision, and patience. The next day, Marcus arrived at his office in downtown Chicago. His assistant met him with a folder. "The legal team's ready. So is corporate." He nodded. "Let's get started." The meeting room filled with quiet determination. Lawyers reviewed footage, screenshots, and statements. The communications director spoke calmly. "We have leverage here. The airline violated multiple anti-discrimination policies." Marcus looked at the screen, watching the clip of himself being led away. "We won't sue right away," he said finally. "We'll make them come to us." His strategy wasn't revenge, it was accountability. He wanted the airline to face what they'd done, not just to him, but to anyone who'd ever been judged for their skin before their story. He drafted an internal report summarizing everything: timestamps, officer names, agent conduct. Then he forwarded it directly to the Federal Aviation Authority and Civil Rights Division. By that evening, calls began pouring in, from regulators, from reporters, from Delta's corporate office. The story wasn't just a viral video anymore. It was a full-blown investigation. And Marcus? He stayed silent. Calm. Professional. Watching as the same people who doubted him now scrambled to fix the mess they'd made. He wasn't finished, not even close. Because what came next would shake the entire airline to its core. The morning air in downtown Chicago carried the hum of headlines. Reporters clustered outside the Delta regional office, microphones raised, faces alert. Inside, executives scrambled, watching the same viral clip again and again. In the video, Marcus Reed sat calmly as two officers led him away. His face unreadable. His composure hauntingly professional. What they didn't know yet was who they'd humiliated. The airline's PR manager, Jenna Lawson, leaned over the table. "We need to issue an apology. Now." Her boss shook his head. "Not until we understand who this man is. What if we apologize and it turns out he was in the wrong?" "Trust me," Jenna said quietly. "He's not in the wrong. And the internet's already decided that too." She turned the laptop to show the trending hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack. Under it, millions of comments poured in, stories of discrimination, frustration, and exhaustion. Across the city, Marcus watched the same chaos unfold from his office window. He wasn't smiling, but there was a quiet resolve in his eyes. His assistant Jordan walked in. "Sir, CNN wants an interview." "So does Good Morning America." Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. Let the airline speak first." Jordan hesitated. "You really think they'll admit fault?" "Oh, they will," Marcus said. "They just don't know it yet." He turned to his computer and opened a confidential file labeled Aerosec Contract 2025, the multi-billion-dollar government contract his company held to upgrade airport security infrastructure. Delta was one of their largest private partners in the project. He drafted a brief email to the Federal Aviation Authority. "In light of recent events involving Delta Airlines' handling of passenger verification and profiling procedures, I recommend an internal review of all active partnerships with their security team. Full documentation attached." Within an hour, it was acknowledged. By noon, the FAA called Delta's corporate office directly. Meanwhile at Delta headquarters, The atmosphere was chaos. Conference calls buzzed with phrases like potential lawsuit, discrimination liability, and contract risk. Jenna pulled up a report. Sir, the passenger's name, Marcus Reed, matches a corporate executive from Orion Systems. Her boss frowned. And? She swallowed. Orion Systems is one of the companies overseeing our digital verification rollout. The same project we bragged about last quarter. Silence. He stood abruptly. You're telling me we detained the man responsible for the technology we're using to prevent exactly this? Jenna nodded. He ran a hand down his face. We're dead. The phones kept ringing. Shareholders wanted answers. The press wanted statements. And customers, outraged customers, wanted accountability. The story had moved from social media outrage to mainstream coverage. Every outlet framed it the same way. Black executive profiled while flying first class on airline partnering with his own company. Back at Marcus's office, his communications team gathered around a large screen. Sir, CNN just confirmed Delta's response. They're launching an internal investigation. Marcus nodded. Good. Let's keep the pressure steady but professional. No threats. No interviews. Just facts. One of his team members asked. Should we release your title now? Marcus paused. Not yet. They're still guessing who I am. Let them sweat. He leaned forward, voice low but sharp. When we do reveal it, it'll be on our terms, with proof of everything. He turned to Jordan. Send me the official statement draft. Jordan handed him a folder. Inside was a clean, concise paragraph. Orion Systems has become aware of an incident involving one of our senior executives. We are cooperating with the Federal Aviation Authority and the Department of Transportation to ensure a transparent investigation into discriminatory conduct by Delta Airlines personnel. Marcus read it twice. Perfect. Publish it. Within minutes, the internet exploded again. This time, the story wasn't about a random passenger. It was about a tech executive, one with influence in aviation contracts worth billions. Comment sections lit up with disbelief. He designs the systems that airline uses. Delta really profiled the guy building their security tech. This just turned corporate. By afternoon, news anchors used phrases like potential corporate crisis and major embarrassment for Delta. Inside the airline's war room, executives sat in a tense circle, laptops open, faces drawn. Damage control, one muttered. We need to reach out to him directly. We can't, Jenna replied. He's already escalated this through federal channels. What about the crew? The flight attendant who made the report? They're suspended pending investigation, she said. Her boss exhaled. Okay. Schedule a press conference. We'll admit procedural error, not discrimination. But when the press conference aired, the public saw right through it. The spokesperson read from a script. Delta Airlines regrets the unfortunate misunderstanding that occurred during pre-boarding at O'Hare International Airport. We are reviewing our procedures to ensure this does not happen again. Twitter reacted instantly. Misunderstanding? You had him arrested. Say racism, not review. Unbelievable corporate speak. The backlash grew. Celebrities retweeted the story. Politicians weighed in. And still, Marcus said nothing. The twist revealed. 3 days later, Marcus finally agreed to an interview with Forbes. The journalist, clearly nervous, began with the obvious question. Mr. Reed, why stay silent for so long? Marcus smiled faintly. Because silence makes people show their true colors. He paused, then continued. I wanted the world to see how quickly assumptions turn into accusations when someone looks like me. Even success doesn't shield you from prejudice. He handed her a document. This is the letter we're submitting to the Department of Transportation, requesting that Delta's participation in our security modernization program be paused pending review. The journalist blinked. That's billions of dollars in contracts. Marcus nodded. They profiled the wrong man. The next morning, the headline read, Orion Systems executive suspends $2.4 billion contract with Delta over racial profiling scandal. The internet erupted. Stock analysts called it a corporate disaster. Delta's shares fell 12% in 2 days. For the first time, the airline's CEO personally called Marcus. "Mr. Reed, this has gone far enough. Let's resolve this privately." Marcus's voice was calm. "It stopped being private the moment your staff put me in handcuffs for sitting in a seat I paid for." The line went quiet. Finally, the CEO said, "What do you want?" Marcus paused. "I don't want an apology. I want reform. Training. Diversity in leadership. Public acknowledgement of what happened, not just to me, but to every person who's faced the same bias." The CEO exhaled. "You'll have it." The public turns. By week's end, Delta issued a formal apology, this time in clear language. Delta Airlines deeply apologizes to Mr. Marcus Reed for the unacceptable racial profiling incident that occurred at O'Hare International Airport. We are implementing immediate reforms and leadership training across all levels of staff. We thank Mr. Reed for his professionalism and integrity throughout this process. Marcus read it quietly in his office. For the first time, he allowed himself to smile. Jordan entered. "So, are we done?" "Not quite," Marcus said, closing the laptop. "We've changed one airline. Now we make sure the system follows." Foreshadowing. The camera pans to Marcus looking out his office window at the skyline. The phone buzzes again, another call, another opportunity for accountability. He answers softly. "Marcus Reed speaking." A new voice says, "Mr. Reed, we'd like to talk about implementing your system at the federal level. After what happened, people are finally listening." He smiles faintly. "Good. Let's make sure they keep listening." The screen fades to black. 3 days after the public apology, Delta Airlines looked nothing like the proud, polished company that once boasted record profits. Inside their Atlanta headquarters, tension hung like a fog. Executives avoided eye contact in hallways. HR was working overtime. Lawyers camped in conference rooms. The incident with Marcus Reed wasn't just a PR nightmare, it had opened every old wound the company thought it had buried. Jenna Lawson, the PR manager who'd first pushed for a public apology, hadn't slept in 48 hours. She sat at her desk surrounded by stacks of printed tweets and emails from furious customers. Some canceled lifelong memberships with Delta SkyMiles. Others posted screenshots of their deleted accounts captioned, "Flying with dignity, not discrimination. Corporate wants daily updates." Her assistant muttered, dropping off another file. "They're panicking. Stock's down again, 8% this morning." Jenna rubbed her temples. "It's not the numbers that scare me," she said softly. "It's the silence." "The silence?" She nodded. "Marcus Reed hasn't said a word since the Forbes interview. Not one tweet, not one statement. That means he's planning something." She was right. Behind closed doors. In another part of the city, Marcus sat across from his legal counsel. The room was quiet except for the sound of papers rustling. "The airline has issued a full apology," his lawyer said. "They're offering an undisclosed settlement if you drop all pending complaints." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Settlement? I never filed a lawsuit." "Exactly. But they're terrified you might." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I'm not interested in money. I'm interested in accountability. Has the FAA confirmed the internal review?" "Yes," the lawyer replied. "They've suspended Delta's participation in the Orion Systems rollout pending investigation. That means millions in delays for them, possibly billions." Marcus nodded slowly. "Good. Maybe that'll make them listen." He wasn't out for revenge. He was out for results. He wanted real, measurable change, policies that would stop this from happening to anyone else. He looked out the window, deep in thought. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, but his mind was on something bigger. It's time for reform, not reaction. The crew's reckoning. At the same time, inside Delta's employee training facility, the staff from Flight 281 sat in a circle. The atmosphere was heavy with shame and confusion. The lead flight attendant, Karen Doyle, looked pale and exhausted. She had been the one who first flagged Marcus's ticket as potentially fraudulent. Her supervisor entered with a clipboard. "The investigation's complete," he said flatly. "Effective immediately, you're being placed on unpaid suspension pending termination review." Karen's jaw tightened. "Termination? I followed protocol." "No, you didn't," the supervisor replied quietly. "You made a judgment call based on appearance, not data. The system didn't flag his ticket, you did." Her hands trembled. "I didn't mean to." He cut her off. "Intent doesn't undo impact." The room fell silent. The weight of his words lingered. For the first time, Karen realized this wasn't just about one mistake. It was about a pattern, one that she'd never questioned because she'd never had to. Inside Delta's boardroom, the board of directors gathered in emergency session. At the head of the long table sat the CEO, Richard Hale, looking drained but determined. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we've mishandled this from the start. It's not just one employee. It's a culture issue. We need to make sweeping changes: leadership diversity, mandatory bias training, and an external review board." An older board member frowned. "You're suggesting we invite outsiders to judge us?" "Yes," Hale said sharply. "Because we've proven we can't judge ourselves." A murmur ran through the room. For once, even the skeptics had no argument. "Mr. Reed has made his point," Hale continued. "Now we have to decide what kind of company we want to be after this. Reactive or reformed." The power of silence. Back in his office, Marcus sat with Jordan, reviewing a new proposal. It wasn't about punishing Delta. It was about building something larger. "Sir, what's this?" Jordan asked. Marcus slid the document across the desk. The title read, "Initiative Horizon, National Anti-Bias Training Program for Aviation Personnel." "It's a partnership proposal," Marcus explained. "If Delta truly wants to fix this, they'll fund this initiative. And we'll open it to every airline in the country." Jordan smiled. "So instead of destroying them, you're making them help everyone else." "Exactly." He paused, then added, "That's how you win, not by shouting, but by changing the system that made you shout in the first place." Public reaction turns hopeful. A week later, Marcus's proposal went public. The headline read, "Black Executive Behind Delta Scandal Launches Nationwide Training Program for Airline Workers." The internet, once filled with outrage, began filling with admiration. He didn't just complain, he built a solution. This is how real change happens. Marcus Reed for Secretary of Transportation. Airlines across the country reached out, eager to join the initiative before Delta did. Behind the scenes, Delta executives knew they had no choice. If they didn't join, they'd be seen as resistant to change. At the next board meeting, the CEO announced, "We're signing on to Initiative Horizon as founding partners. It's the least we can do." Karen Doyle's redemption. Weeks later, Karen received a letter in the mail. She'd expected it to be her official termination. Instead, it was an invitation. From Marcus Reed. Subject, Opportunity for Change. The letter read, "People make mistakes. What matters is what they learn from them. I believe in second chances. If you're willing, I'd like you to participate in our first pilot program for Initiative Horizon, to help train new staff on bias awareness. Your story could help others see what you didn't." Karen stared at the letter for a long time, tears welling up. She whispered to herself, "He could have ruined me, but he's helping me." For the first time, she felt the full weight of what she'd done, and the grace of being given a chance to do better. Behind the headlines. As the program gained traction, something unexpected happened. Other passengers came forward with stories of racial profiling at airports. But now, instead of silence, there was support. Media outlets began calling Marcus's program a turning point. The Department of Transportation endorsed it. Even the president mentioned it in a press briefing, calling it an example of leadership in the face of injustice. And through it all, Marcus stayed grounded. He didn't gloat. He didn't point fingers. He simply said in one viral quote, "You can't fix prejudice with punishment. You fix it with perspective." That line was shared millions of times. A private moment. Late one night, Marcus walked through his quiet home, stopping by his daughter's room. She was asleep, clutching her stuffed giraffe. He tucked the blanket around her and whispered, "You'll grow up in a world that's a little better than the one I had. That's enough." He looked out the window into the dark sky, a plane's lights passing overhead. For the first time since that awful day, he felt peace. Meanwhile, at Delta HQ, CEO Richard Hale stood before the company's 50,000 employees in a live broadcast. He took a deep breath and said, "We made a terrible mistake. But a man we wronged gave us a chance to make it right. From this day on, Delta will be a partner in Initiative Horizon, and a leader in equality, not an obstacle to it." The employees watching erupted in applause. Somewhere in Chicago, Marcus watched the speech on his phone and smiled quietly. Jordan asked, "So, are we done now?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah. We're done." He closed his laptop, leaned back, and whispered, "For now." The police station was cold, fluorescent, and impersonal, just like every other room that had made Jamal feel less than human that day. He sat in the small interrogation chamber, his wrists red from the cuffs. Across from him sat Officer Reynolds, a middle-aged white man with sharp eyes that carried a mix of suspicion and guilt. He'd been the one to arrest Jamal at the airport, and now that he had him here, something in his demeanor had shifted. Jamal sat tall, despite exhaustion settling deep in his bones. "So," he said calmly, "are you going to tell me why I'm here?" Reynolds avoided his gaze, flipping through papers that didn't exist just to buy time. The silence between them stretched. "You're being held for questioning regarding possible fraud," Reynolds finally said. "Your ticket, first class, international route, was purchased with a corporate card. We're verifying ownership." Jamal's eyebrows rose. "Ownership? You mean my corporate card?" Reynolds hesitated. Jamal leaned forward. "That card belongs to J. Miles Enterprises. I'm the J. Miles in that name. The CEO." The officer's eyes flickered for the briefest moment, confusion, disbelief, and then something like embarrassment. He'd seen that name before, on business news headlines, philanthropy features, and tech innovation awards, but his brain refused to connect the dots. "You're saying you're the owner of that company?" Reynolds asked skeptically. "I'm saying," Jamal replied evenly, "that you just arrested a black CEO for sitting in the seat he paid for." The words landed heavy in the room. The officer looked at the mirror on the wall, the one-way glass hiding whoever was observing this conversation. "Look," Reynolds began, lowering his tone. "I'm just following procedure. The airline called it in as a possible case of ticket fraud. Said the man in first class didn't match the traveler profile." Jamal gave a bitter laugh. "Didn't look like the traveler profile, you mean?" Silence again. Meanwhile, back at the airport, chaos was unfolding. Dozens of passengers had recorded the arrest, and clips were already spreading across social media. Some posted in outrage, others in confusion. Hashtags started trending within minutes. Hashtag flying while black, hashtag justice for Jamal, and hashtag airport racism. The airline's PR team was scrambling. A young intern, wide-eyed and panicked, showed the VP of Communications a TikTok video that had already hit 2 million views. It showed Jamal being led away in cuffs while a voice off-camera shouted, "That's the guy who helped fund the Children's Cancer Project last year!" Recognition was spreading fast. Inside the interrogation room, Jamal remained calm. "Call your supervisor," he said quietly. "Then call the head of the airline." "I'll wait." Reynolds hesitated, then left the room. The moment the door closed, Jamal took a slow breath. His mind wasn't just on himself now. It was on his son, Malik, who would be waiting at home, excited to hear about his father's trip. How would he explain that his dad got arrested for sitting in a first-class seat? He couldn't let that narrative win. Not again. 30 minutes later, the station doors opened abruptly. In walked a woman in a gray suit, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. Behind her trailed two men in formal attire carrying briefcases. "Mr. Miles?" she said as she entered the room. "I'm so sorry for the delay. I'm your legal counsel. The company sent me the moment we saw the footage." Jamal nodded slightly. She turned to Officer Reynolds. "You're detaining a high-profile executive without probable cause or evidence. That's a violation of both civil rights and corporate law. He will be released immediately." Reynolds blinked. "Ma'am, the airline," she cut in, "is about to face one of the largest discrimination lawsuits in U.S. aviation history." The tension was electric. Jamal said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence carried more authority than any shouted defense. Moments later, the cuffs were removed. The officer mumbled something close to an apology, but Jamal didn't respond. As he walked out of the station, reporters were already waiting. Cameras flashed. Questions flew through the air. "Mr. Miles, were you racially profiled? Do you plan to sue the airline? What message do you have for young black travelers?" Jamal paused at the doors, his face calm but unreadable. "My message," he said clearly, "is that no seat on this planet should depend on your skin color." And with that, he walked toward the black sedan waiting outside, his company's vehicle, driven by his assistant who'd flown in from the city the moment she heard. But what Jamal didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The truth about who called in the report, and why, would take everything to a whole new level. Because hidden behind the corporate apology drafts and the PR statements was one woman who had made the call, and her reason wasn't just racism, it was revenge. The following morning, Jamal's face was on every major news outlet. "Black CEO arrested for flying first class," read one headline. Another said, "Corporate executive mistaken for imposter, airline under fire." Cable news hosts debated it endlessly. Social media boiled over. Some defended him, others tried to twist the story, questioning his behavior. But beneath all the noise, one thing was clear: the airline was in full panic mode. At their headquarters, a high-stakes emergency meeting was underway. The CEO of the airline, a man named Richard Halstead, sat at the head of the table. His face was pale, his tie loosened. Every PR and legal executive looked like they hadn't slept. "We need to get ahead of this," Richard said. "This isn't just bad press, this is a full-scale crisis." "Sir," said one of the VPs, "the problem isn't just the arrest. It's who he is. Jamal Miles isn't just a CEO, he's one of the airline's top investors. Through a holding company, he owns almost 8% of our stock." The room fell dead silent. Richard froze. "What did you just say?" "Yes, sir," the VP confirmed. "He's part of Horizon Ventures, the fund that supported our fleet renewal project last year." Richard's head dropped into his hands. "God help us." But there was one person in the corner of the room who didn't look shaken. A woman, impeccably dressed, expression calm, eyes hard as glass. Her name, Emily Waters, head of passenger relations. And, as fate would reveal, the one who had triggered the call that led to Jamal's arrest. When Richard dismissed the meeting, he stopped her at the door. "Emily, a word," he said quietly. She turned, her face composed. "Of course. You were on duty when this happened. Your report was the one that went to the airport police. Walk me through it." She clasped her hands behind her back. "The flight attendants reported a discrepancy. Passenger in seat 2A didn't match the system profile. The corporate card used didn't align with the ID presented. I followed standard protocol and alerted security." Richard stared at her for a long moment. "Standard protocol? Or personal bias?" She didn't flinch. "Sir, I've followed this policy for 12 years. If there was bias, it wasn't mine." But he wasn't convinced. There was something in her tone, too steady, too practiced. "Emily," he said finally, "the legal team will be conducting an internal review. You're temporarily suspended with pay. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded and walked out of the room. But as she left, a flash of anger crossed her face. Not fear. Anger. That night, in her apartment overlooking the city, Emily sat with a glass of wine and her laptop open. She scrolled through article after article about Jamal Miles. The headlines, the public sympathy, the outcry. Every time his face appeared, she clenched her jaw. How does he keep winning? She muttered. On her screen was a photo from 5 years earlier, a corporate gala. A younger Jamal stood shaking hands with a board member. In the background, slightly out of focus, was Emily herself, wearing the same smile she'd forced every day back then. The truth was, Emily and Jamal had history. 5 years earlier, she'd been a mid-level manager at Horizon Ventures, the same investment group Jamal would later lead. She'd been ambitious, sharp, determined to climb. But when a promotion opened up, a regional director position, Jamal had given it to another candidate, a black woman named Renee. Emily had never forgotten that day. She'd walked into Jamal's office, trembling with frustration. You know I earned that role. I've been here longer than her. I know the clients. Jamal had looked up calmly. You're good, Emily. But Renee's better for this market. She connects with people in a way that goes beyond numbers. You mean she fits your diversity checklist? Emily snapped. Jamal's expression hardened. Watch your words. But she didn't. She walked out that day fuming, and eventually left Horizon Ventures altogether. The anger she carried curdled over time, transforming into quiet resentment. When she joined the airline, she never expected to see Jamal again. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. So when she saw his name pop up on the first-class passenger list, it had hit her like a spark to dry grass. All that old bitterness came rushing back. I told them, she whispered bitterly to herself, watching the video of his arrest for the 100th time. He doesn't belong up there. Meanwhile, Jamal sat in his penthouse, the glow of city lights reflecting off the windows. He was calm on the surface, but inside, his thoughts were churning. His lawyer, Vanessa, sat across from him, scrolling through her phone. We've confirmed that the complaint originated with the airline's passenger relations head, Emily Waters. We're digging into her record. Find everything, Jamal said quietly. And when you do, make sure the world knows it wasn't an accident. Vanessa nodded. We're preparing a press statement and a legal claim. But Jamal, are you sure you want to make this public? He looked at her sharply. If I stay silent, they win. And I'm done staying silent. The next day, Emily's phone buzzed nonstop. Anonymous emails. Voicemails. News alerts. One headline caught her attention. Source reveals airline employee who called police on black CEO has history with him. Her face strained of color. She opened the article, and there it was, laid bare. The old company photo, her name, the connection to Horizon Ventures. Someone had leaked everything. Within hours, the backlash hit like a hurricane. Thousands of angry comments flooded her social media. You ruined a man's life over ego. This is why people don't trust corporate power. Racist and jealous, deadly combo. Her employer issued a public statement announcing her termination. But what no one knew, not yet, was that Jamal had something bigger planned. He didn't just want an apology. He wanted systemic change. So that night, he made a single call to his board of directors. Pull the funding, he said calmly. You mean from the airline project? Asked one of the board members. Yes, Jamal replied. Effective immediately. But Jamal, another protested. That's $1 billion partnership. Jamal's voice didn't waver. Not anymore. I refuse to let my company fund discrimination. They can find another investor. There was silence. Then quiet agreement. Within hours, Horizon Ventures officially withdrew its investment, sending the airline's stock tumbling by 12% overnight. Across town, Emily watched the news in disbelief. Her actions hadn't just cost her job, they triggered a financial storm that would haunt the airline for years. And in that moment, for the first time, the full weight of what she'd done hit her. Not only had she tried to humiliate Jamal, she'd destroyed her own career in the process. But for Jamal, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice, and proving that sometimes, silence speaks louder than outrage. The next morning, the world woke up to chaos. The airline's stock was in freefall. Business channels ran breaking news banners every hour. Horizon Ventures withdraws $1 billion investment after racism scandal. CEO Jamal Miles calls for accountability and change. The story wasn't just national anymore, it was global. News anchors debated it in London, Nairobi, and Toronto. Talk shows invited social justice advocates, airline executives, and corporate ethics experts. Every platform echoed the same question: how could this happen in 2025? And in the middle of that storm stood Jamal, calm, deliberate, and completely in control. He didn't rush to social media. He didn't post angry rants or give emotional statements. Instead, he waited until the right moment. And when he finally spoke, the world listened. He appeared on a live interview with one of the biggest news anchors in the country, sitting across from her in a sleek, minimalist studio. The anchor, Maya Torres, leaned forward. "Mr. Miles," she began, "you've been at the center of an international firestorm. People are calling this one of the most public examples of racial profiling in years. What do you want to say to those who argue this was just a misunderstanding?" Jamal looked directly into the camera. "Misunderstanding ends when accountability begins," he said softly. "This wasn't a mistake. It was a mindset, one that says certain people don't belong in certain spaces. I've faced it my entire life. The only difference this time is that the world got to see it." The studio fell silent. Maya nodded slowly. "Do you believe the airline should be held legally responsible?" Jamal paused. "I don't want to destroy them," he said. "But I won't let them hide behind excuses. What I want is reform, mandatory anti-bias training for every employee, public transparency in hiring, and equal access to executive opportunities. If they do that, maybe something good can come from all this." It wasn't anger that made his words powerful. It was restraint. And the world noticed. Across the country, people gathered outside the airline's headquarters. Protesters held signs that read, "Equality takes flight," and "Flying while black shouldn't be a crime." The media captured scenes of passengers of every color and background standing together, united under one message: justice. Inside the company, things were falling apart. CEO Richard Halstead faced enormous pressure from the board. 2 executives had resigned. Several employees had leaked internal messages revealing a pattern of discrimination complaints ignored for years. Richard knew the company wouldn't survive another week like this. So he called an emergency press conference. The crowd was massive. Cameras lined the front. Reporters elbowed each other for position. Richard stepped up to the podium, his hands shaking slightly. "On behalf of the entire airline," he began, "I want to issue a public apology to Mr. Jamal Miles and to every passenger who has ever felt discriminated against under our care." He paused, swallowing hard. "This incident exposed serious failures in our culture. We take full responsibility. Effective immediately, the company is launching a comprehensive diversity and inclusion reform program. Every employee, from cabin crew to the board, will undergo new training and evaluation." Reporters shouted questions, but he raised his hand to quiet them. "We've also reinstated our partnership with Horizon Ventures, under new terms directed by Mr. Miles himself." The crowd buzzed with shock. Richard continued, "He's agreed to meet with us, not as an investor this time, but as a consultant for equality in aviation." It was a stunning twist. The following week, Jamal entered the same headquarters where months earlier he'd been treated like a criminal. But this time, security guards opened the doors with respect. Cameras flashed as he stepped into the conference room filled with executives waiting nervously. Richard stood up, extending his hand. "Mr. Miles, thank you for coming." Jamal shook it, though his expression stayed neutral. "Let's make sure this never happens again," he said simply. They spent hours discussing reforms. From recruitment to in-flight policies, everything was up for change. Jamal insisted on new reporting systems for discrimination claims, anonymous employee feedback tools, and partnerships with historically black colleges to recruit diverse talent. By the end of the meeting, even the most skeptical executives looked convinced. For the first time, someone wasn't trying to punish them, he was trying to fix the system. But not everyone was ready to accept the new reality. Emily Waters watched the televised press conference from her small apartment. She looked pale, her hair unkempt, eyes tired from sleepless nights. Her phone was dead silent now, no calls, no emails, no friends. The news called her the face of corporate racism. Her name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Every attempt to defend herself online only made things worse. She picked up her phone again, scrolling through hateful comments. "You ruined your life for hate," one read. Another said, "You'll never work again." For the first time, the magnitude of her actions hit her. She had spent years blaming others for her failures, but this time, there was no one left to blame. She turned off the TV and whispered into the quiet room, "I was wrong." Meanwhile, Jamal's life had shifted in ways he couldn't have imagined. He became an unexpected symbol, not just of success, but of grace under fire. Interviews poured in. College students quoted his speech in essays. Nonprofits reached out for collaboration. And yet, Jamal didn't see himself as a hero. One evening, sitting on his balcony, he looked out over the city lights. His son Malik joined him, holding a tablet. "Dad," Malik said softly, "my friends saw your video. They said you're famous now." Jamal smiled faintly. "Fame doesn't matter, son. What matters is what we do with it." Malik frowned. "But why did they think you didn't belong in first class?" That question, pure and innocent, pierced him deeper than any headline. He pulled his son closer. "Because some people see color before they see character," he said quietly. "But we're changing that. One truth at a time." Malik nodded, his small hand gripping his father's. Days later, Jamal stood at a university podium, delivering a speech titled, "Dignity Has No Class." He looked out at hundreds of faces, students, travelers, workers, dreamers. "What happened to me at that airport wasn't new," he began. "But it was a reminder that silence only helps the system that hurts us. Every time we speak up, calmly, boldly, fearlessly, we rewrite what's possible." The audience rose in applause. Some cried. Some just nodded quietly, absorbing every word. As he walked off stage, his assistant whispered, "The airline just announced a new scholarship fund in your name, for underrepresented youth in aviation." Jamal paused, smiling. Then maybe something good did take flight after all. A few months had passed since the incident that changed everything. The world had moved on to new headlines, new controversies, but for Jamal Miles, the impact of that day still rippled through his life in unexpected ways. He'd returned to work at Horizon Ventures, but things weren't the same. The arrests, the lawsuits, the interviews, they'd all transformed him. He no longer thought about quarterly profits or market expansions with the same urgency. His focus had shifted toward purpose. Every Monday morning, the first thing he did wasn't check stock prices, it was read letters. Thousands of them. From across the world. One from a teenage boy in Atlanta. "Mr. Miles, I was the only black kid in my aviation class. I wanted to quit, but after hearing your story, I decided to stay. Thank you." Another from a retired flight attendant. "I used to ignore what I saw because I was scared to lose my job. But now I speak up. You gave me courage." And yet another from a white father in Canada. "My daughter saw your interview. She asked me, 'Dad, why did they arrest him?' I didn't know what to say. But we talked for an hour about racism. Thank you for helping me teach her something real." Every single letter reminded Jamal that this wasn't about revenge. It was about legacy. The airline, now under intense public scrutiny, had completed the reforms Jamal demanded. They called the program Open Skies Initiative. It wasn't perfect, no reform ever is, but it was a start. Posters in airports read, "Every passenger, every story equal respect." Cabin crew underwent bias and empathy training. Hiring practices became more transparent. And for the first time in the company's history, the diversity committee wasn't symbolic, it was functional. Real power. Real accountability. At the top of that committee sat Renee, the same woman Jamal once promoted years ago, the one Emily had envied. She now ran the airline's corporate ethics division. And she made sure every meeting started the same way, by showing a short clip of Jamal's calm words from that interview. "No seat on this planet should depend on your skin color." It became the company's unofficial mantra. Meanwhile, Emily Waters had disappeared from the spotlight. Some said she moved to another city. Others claimed she tried to rebuild her career under a new name. But in truth, she'd quietly begun volunteering at a community center that helped young job seekers from marginalized backgrounds. At first, it was guilt that drove her. She wanted to make up for what she'd done. But over time, something changed. She began to listen, really listen, to the stories of those she once judged. One day, a young woman at the center recognized her. "You're that woman from the news," the girl said, cautious but curious. "The one who called the police on that guy." Emily tensed. "Yes," she admitted quietly. The girl didn't lash out. She simply said, "You messed up. But you're here now. That's something." That moment humbled her in a way nothing else could. It didn't erase what she'd done, but it started something new. Growth. Understanding. Back at Horizon Ventures, Jamal's colleagues noticed a change in him too. He smiled more often. He spent more time mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. He launched a foundation called The Sky Belongs to Everyone, aimed at funding scholarships for underrepresented students in aviation, engineering, and leadership. At the foundation's first event, Jamal took the stage before a packed room of students. "When I was arrested," he began, "I thought my world was ending. But what I didn't see then was that it was only beginning. That day wasn't about humiliation. It was about revelation. It showed me how far we still have to go, and how powerful one voice can be when it refuses to stay quiet." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. But one moment stood out above all. From the back of the room, Malik, now a few years older, stood proudly, recording his father on his phone. When Jamal stepped off stage, his son hugged him tightly. "You didn't just fight for you, Dad," he said. "You fought for everyone." Jamal smiled, emotion softening his voice. "That's what real power is, son. Not money. Not titles. It's how you use your story to lift others." Months later, Jamal found himself back at the same airport where it all began. Same gates. Same walkways. Same noise of rolling luggage and boarding calls. But this time, people recognized him for a different reason. Passengers nodded respectfully. A flight attendant approached him with a smile. "Mr. Miles," she said, "we're honored to have you on board. Please, right this way." As he took his seat in first class, he looked around. The crew was diverse. The energy was calm. Equal. A small thing, but to him, it meant everything. As the plane took off, he looked out the window at the clouds and whispered, "Finally flying free." Months later, at a leadership summit in Washington, Jamal gave his most famous speech, one that would later be quoted around the world. He stood under bright lights, facing an audience of executives, students, and policymakers. His tone was simple, steady, grounded. "When I was dragged off a plane for sitting where I'd earned the right to sit, I could have walked away angry. But instead, I chose to walk forward, with purpose. Because racism isn't just about hate. It's about systems built on silence. And every time we speak truth, we shake those systems." He paused, scanning the crowd. "I don't want another black man, or woman, or child to have to prove they belong. I want a world where belonging is automatic." The room rose in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled notes. But Jamal wasn't thinking about any of that. He thought about that day in the airport, The handcuffs. The looks. The humiliation. And how it led here, to this moment of peace, of impact, of legacy. As the applause faded, Jamal stepped off the stage, phone buzzing in his pocket. He glanced down. It was a message from Renee. Just finished finalizing the Open Skies scholarship. It's officially global. Your name's on it. Congratulations, Jamal. The sky really does belong to everyone now. He smiled. For the first time in a long while, he felt weightless. Justice had been served, but more importantly, change had taken root. When the story finally hit the news, it wasn't about a rowdy passenger or a security misunderstanding. It was about systemic bias, accountability, and the power of truth. The airline tried to apologize, but the world had already seen the video, heard the recording, and witnessed the arrogance firsthand. Marcus didn't just walk out of that courtroom a free man. He walked out a symbol. A reminder that dignity isn't granted by a uniform, a badge, or a boarding pass. It's something you defend. And sometimes, defending it means standing alone in an airport full of people who'd rather look away. The officer who arrested him was later suspended. The airline faced an internal investigation, and several crew members were quietly replaced. But the most important change? People started recording. People started asking questions before assuming guilt. Marcus later spoke at a youth conference where he said something that went viral. Don't let the world convince you that your worth needs permission. Walk tall, even when they try to cut your wings. So if you're watching this, remember this story isn't just about Marcus. It's about every traveler who's been judged before being greeted. Every voice that's been dismissed before being heard. Because one man's courage to stay calm, record the truth, and fight back didn't just clear his name, it started a conversation the world still needs to have. Stay aware. Stay kind. And next time you see something unfair, don't stay silent. If you believe everyone deserves to fly, live, and be treated with dignity, share this story. Let's make sure no one else ever gets handcuffed for the color of their seat or their skin. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep your eyes open for the next story that challenges what you think you know.